I think about, I think for about 15, 16 years since I started teaching in the adult Sunday school class together. Chris and I had the Faith Matters class for many years and still are glad to see some version of that moving along. But I love, love, love to teach. And it is a gift to me to be asked to do this. It's a real privilege and a calling for me. I also serve as your church treasurer. I do not take any questions about money this morning, but if you want to see me after the class, we'll talk money. I am a staff member of Grace Presbytery. I am the director of property and real estate, and that sounds so businesslike, and it is a lot of days. It's a lot of business transactions, but it's really about ministry as well. As I help churches with their property issues, as I help churches lease out their spaces to other worshiping communities, as I help churches deal with their financial struggles and dealing with their buildings. Anybody familiar with that around here? And as the other part of what I do is I help dissolve congregations, and then I help sell their property or find a new purpose for that property. So I consider this, while it is very much a business job, it's also very much a ministry. I think in the church world, we're seeing a lot of death and resurrection right now. And that is a consistent theme from the earliest days of Scripture all through time about God's big plan for us is this death and resurrection, death and resurrection, death and resurrection, because that's the way you find new life. And I think we are in a time of death and resurrection right now. And it is time for us as a church community to come to terms with that and to think about what does that mean, not only for us, but for our children and our children's children and the generations to come. I think we'll find new meaning in the legacies that we leave, but we also have to be ready to embrace it now and not just expect the later generations to take care of it. So here's my first shot at we'll be doing this today and next week. My first shot at making sure the PowerPoint changer works. Oh, what'd I do now? Off the screen, whatever I did. Chart number 2. So a couple things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how much we're making the headlines right now. We're going to talk about what is changing among us. I said, I feel the earth move under my feet because sometimes it does feel like so much is changing. I feel the earth vibrating. I don't know if you feel that way some days, but I do. We're going to talk about a woman named Phyllis Tickle. Phyllis Tickle. She's very interesting in some of her views of the future, and I think has a lot to say to us. And then we're going to talk about a new thing that will emerge. Next week, we'll be looking at, I'll go ahead and tell you this now. We're going to be listening to a video from another author, Diana, who talks about Christianity after religion and what that really means. We're going to be talking about the PCUSA and some of the things that we are doing as a denomination as we see our denomination decline in membership and in numbers of churches. How are we approaching that now? So I think it'll be real interesting next week, and we might even do some analysis of what we're doing at Canyon Creek that could be different. I think we're on the right track with a lot of things we are doing. So yeah, us Christians are making the news. I'm sure you all have seen this because it has been on every, okay. Try now. Okay. I did a Google on this and I found thousands and thousands and thousands of headlines just in the last year or so that said things like, losing their religion, why U.S. churches are on the decline. That was from The Guardian, which is a UK-based newspaper. Christianity in the U.S. is quickly shrinking and may no longer be the majority religion within just a few decades, research finds. This came from CBS News in September of last year. And church going and belief in God stands at historic lows. This is from The Hill. There were thousands and thousands of these where they had picked up on some recently released research from Pew Research, from Gallup, from Barna, who's another big surveyor of religion, Lifeway Research, which is a big arm of the Southern Baptist Church, but they also have a very large statistical department, and they do some great work in that area. And many universities and nonprofits who study the sociology of religion. No matter what we are looking at the sociology of religion. So I think every news outlet had its take. Some, you have the headline writers who want to capture your attention. And as I was reading through these, there was everything about, the demise of the church and the gloom and doom. And so, and then I got to one that was, this is probably my favorite. It says Baylor University professors deny media claims of a dying church in America. And I thought, how interesting that one point of view would say we're not dying. And so, of course, I read through so many of these. And in some ways, it is true. We are dying. We are dying. The church in America is dying as we know it today. And I think it's time for us to come to terms with that. But the church with the big C, the Church of Jesus Christ, will never die. And I am absolutely convinced of that. Absolutely convinced of that. But we're morphing into something new as we go forward, and that's what's uncomfortable for a lot of us. The thing we're having to look at now is when we think of churches, we many times think buildings because we drive down the street and we see another church that used to be First Presbyterian something, and now it's got some other name on the building. It's either another church you've never heard of, or it's turned into, I recently sold a church over in Fort Worth to a funeral home, or someone has taken it and turned it into a restaurant, or even worse, it's just abandoned altogether. And I will be honest with you, we have a few like that, where they're just completely abandoned. We can't even sell them. There's no value there. I've not even had a lot of interest from the salvage companies telling them, we have some beautiful wood carvings in here if you want to come get them. And it's just, there are so many, the market is saturated with closing churches, and that is the physical building, because that's what we think. And that's what the media sees, and that's what people see when they drive past. They say churches are closing at rapid numbers in the US, researchers say, as congregations dwindle across the country and a younger generation of Americans abandons Christianity altogether. Are we seeing that? Maybe abandons altogether is strong words, but I think in terms of what we see and what the statistics are showing, and we can have some discussions about statistics, but I believe in them. I believe that most of these organizations do accurate and statistically correct research, and they come back really, they may not be perfect to the number, but they come back with enough statistical research to give us trend analysis and let us know what's going on. According to Lifeway Research, and this was in 2019, so this was before the pandemic, 4,500 Protestant churches closed in the US, 4,500. It was the first time in the history of the US that the number of churches in the United States had not grown. Again, number of churches is by counting buildings, if you want to think of it that way. Counting, in most cases, constituted congregations. And most congregations, whether you know this or not, are a nonprofit corporation. You have to file paperwork with the state. And so that's one of the ways they find out this information. They talk to the denominations, but they also have information from the state on who is still recorded as an entity. Churches are businesses. That's why I do what I do at the Presbyterian. I work on the business side of closing churches. And we are businesses, and there's a lot of legal and banking and financial transactions, real estate transactions that have to be done to close a church, and that's how they're counting some of these. But we all know that the pandemic certainly accelerated a lot of this, and we are seeing it. I haven't seen any nationwide statistics on it lately, but I can speak for our own denomination and even our own presbytery about what's happening. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I am a bookophile. I'm the librarian's best friend over here, but this book is you'll find many of these in libraries in the sociology and religion section or in the bookstores. This one is called The Autopsy of a Deceased Church. A tough read. It's a tough read, and it's actually written by a pastor. And I think it actually is quite a good book. He's a Baptist pastor, and I may not agree with every little line he has in here, but some of the chapters names are things like "The Past is Our Hero," a church that refused to look like the community, a budget that was inwardly focused, the preference-driven church, the church that rarely prays together, a church with no clear purpose, and one of my favorites, the church who is obsessed over the facilities. Is there hope for the dying church? And he ends with some good thoughts on that. But he talks about the trends of having to close churches and what he sees in the end of life for them, and maybe some ideas about what we can do to keep those from happening. But you'll see many, many books like that. I walked into our Presbyterian library and I asked, can I borrow a few? And she said, here's a section. How many do you want? And that's the truth about it. It really is. He talks in this book about a man who, interestingly, his name was Harry Truman, not the Harry Truman we might think of, but his name was Harry Truman. And he lived at the base of Mount St. Helens. And he had lived there for a long time. He had a nice little cabin in the woods that he loved. And in 1980, the geologists and the scientists started warning that Mount St. Helens was starting to rumble. And they did everything they could to get him to move. And he says, I'm fine right where I am. Nothing needs to change. And I believe it was on May 18th of that year, he died as the lava flowed out and covered his house. And I think that this author of this particular book, The Autopsy of a Deceased Church, uses that analogy as the warning signs are there. Are you going to stay until the lava starts flowing? And are you not going to make any changes until that time comes? Change is not our favorite word. In our own Grace Presbytery, we have had a number of events over the years. It even started back with ordination of women when certain groups left the presbytery, a long history of all kinds of things. We've certainly seen more recently. I think we only had about 7 or 8 churches that left over the LGBTQ issues, which is not many. We had about 160 at the time. So I was pleased to see that many had left. But I have been an employee there for about 5 years, a little less than 5 years, about 4.5 years. And I have closed 10 churches in 5 years. That's averaging 2 a year. And by the way, during the pandemic, we didn't close very many because not much was happening. So I almost erase those years and say, we've had 2 solid years and I've closed 10 churches. I have got 3 that are in process of closing right now. And I will be very honest with you to say that we have a list of ones that we think are fragile churches right now. And we believe within the next 5 to 10 years, we may see another 30 or 40 close. And that's hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow, but it is the truth of where we are and who we are. A study by Pew Research, and I know you can't see the detail here, but I want you to see the concept. So what this is here is they have on the right side in the red, these are answers by people who identified as Christian. And on the left side in the gray, it's people who identified as unaffiliated with any religion. There's another about 6% of Americans that are, that identify with Judaism, Islam, Hindu, and Buddhism. Only about 6% in America. So the other 94% either identify as Christian or unaffiliated. And these charts here show the red, meaning the decline in percentage points between 2009 and 2019. So in a 10-year span, and they looked at it by male and female, they looked at it generationally. If you will see up here, the silent generation only declined by about 2% in terms of the ones still living and whether they identified as Christian or not. The baby boomers declined by 6%, the Gen X's by 8%, and the millennials by 16%. And then they looked at the white non-Hispanic, a decline of 12%, Black non-Hispanic 11%, and Hispanic 10%. Looked at it geographically, the Northeast had a decline of about 15 percentage points. The Midwest and the South were at 10 and 12% decline, and the West was at 9% decline. I'm guessing because there weren't as many to decline in the West, honestly. And then, of course, between the Republican and Democrat, they said they were either affiliated with either of those. There was about a 7% decline of those who identified as Christians who were Republican, and 17% of Democrats that no longer identified. So it was a change, a percentage point. And I think what this tells us, on the other side, the gray is the how the increase was on the unaffiliated side. What it tells us is that's only a 10-year span. And statistically, those are large numbers for a 10-year span. And it was before the pandemic. And I'm going to continue saying it's before the pandemic because the pandemic absolutely accelerated this. It gave people permission to kind of get out of the habit. And I am talking even our good, faithful church members, ones that we still consider alive and well members of Canyon Creek Presbyterian Church. And I know the church office has a list of ones we haven't seen since the pandemic. And we're concerned about those. And we're wondering what's happening to our membership that isn't wildly disaffiliating, but they're just slipping out the back door and not coming back. And the pandemic made it so much easier. There is another report out of Pew that says in 1972, so think about where you were in 1972, if you were around. 92% of Americans said they were Christians. But they expect and they project, based on the trends that they're seeing, the statistical trends, that by 2070, think about where you'll be in 2070, that number will be below 50%. From 1972, so that is a decade, from 1972 to the 2070s. They expect it to drop from 92% to 50% of those who claim to be religiously unaffiliated. That's difficult to think about, isn't it? When we truly believe and have, most of us, grown up in a Christian America.
Karen,
Yes.
does any of this data take into account all the sexual scandals within the church?
We're going to talk about that coming up very soon. Janet asked us to take into account and understanding the sexual scandals, but a lot of other kinds of scandals as well in the church. And that's going to be what we're leading into my next topic here. I wanted to show one more statistical chart. Those of you that are mathematicians and have taken a statistics class, this is a horrible chart because it just has years across the bottom and it has a line here that says average. And that's really all it says. And I looked at this thing and I thought, what in the world is this? Well, they call it the Great Decline. And it's a statistical method where they look at a term that they call religiosity. Okay, probably a made up word there, religiosity. And they take a lot of factors into account, such as how often do you attend a worship service? Do you have a membership with a specific congregation? How frequently do you pray? And some of your feelings toward religion. And so they have a fancy algorithm that they put all that together and they call it the religiosity of the people that they're surveying. So what they're saying here is that since 1962, and there's no numbers down the side here, but since 1962, they have seen a significant decline in the religiosity factor when you combine all those together. They say that, and if you look at it, what they're showing here is the decline from the 80s up to 2012 has been dramatically more rapid than it has any other time. So this is what they're looking at. Like, what in the world is happening to us? Where are we going? What's the deal here? What is the deal? Janet might have a little bit to say about it right there, talking about there's been some scandals, haven't they? If any of you like to read really interesting books, this is one that I did get from the Presbyterian Library called The End of White Christian America. And on its surface, you would think it might be about racism, and there's a little bit in here about this, but it's really a very interesting, it's a heady read. It's an academic read that has a lot of statistics and it's kind of a good sociology book. I love sociology when I was in school, such a fascinating topic, but there are people who are study the sociology of religion. And that's what a lot of this is, the decline of white Christian America, because The reality, folks, is when they start talking about all the churches that have closed, for the most part, they are white Christian churches that are closing.
What is the comparison between rural and urban?
Very, very accurate. That's one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of churches. I don't have the statistics on that, Hal. He asked about the comparison between rural and urban, but certainly the decline of small towns in America. I would say, I've been part of closing about 10 churches in our presbytery in the last few years. About half of those are in small towns scattered throughout Northeast Texas. And because of the decline in small town America, the people just aren't there anymore. They just simply are not there anymore. And
Wasn't, maybe it was before he went on, but some of that was due to, before the PCUSA, where there was a northern church and a southern church in the same town.
right, and long history of Cumberland Presbyterians and, schisms over all kind of social issues. The combination of the northern and southern church, and they didn't need both of them. But I will tell you that right now, Paris, Texas, which some of you may know is not one of our largest towns around, it's a decent small town. But there are 3 Presbyterian churches in Paris, Texas, who all have membership of less than 100, and they refuse to combine, refuse to be a part of one another. It's the Hatfields, the McCoys, and the Smiths. And that's just the way it is, and you're not going to change it. I mean, they have dug their heels in and said, I don't care if we're down to 2 people. I'm not going to be a part of the Hatfields church, right? So we see that kind of thing. And honestly, we see a little bit more of that in small town America. I've got one that I'm in process of closing right now that was down to 4 members. And one of those members, many years ago, decades ago, worked for the school district in this small town, and for some reason unknown, and I don't know anything about the history, he lost his job there and he was not happy about it. So the school district wants to buy this church property now and convert it into some office space, and it's right next door to the high school. And he's refusing to let that happen. He is just pitching a real fit over it because of something that happened in this. And I talked to the school superintendent the other day, and he said, welcome to small towns. And I said, well, it happens in big cities too. And he says, yes, I know, but it's really bad in some of our small towns that we fight over these kinds of things, right? But anyway, it is really interesting to see how the churches, and I would say, Anne, in response to your question about northern and southern, and Hal's question about urban and rural, that most of the ones that we are seeing closing in the urban areas, urban or suburban areas of Dallas-Fort Worth, and probably Dallas-Fort Worth and Tyler are the 3 largest towns that we have in our Presbyterian, Tyler being considerably smaller, the Tyler Longview area. Most of the ones that are in the more urban and suburban areas are closing because the neighborhood has changed around them. White flight, real estate deterioration in the area, zoning issues that have caused problems, those kind of things. But it's because the geography around them has changed, and that would be the same for small churches or large churches that are small town churches or city and suburban churches. When your neighborhood changes around you, and you look around you and you look out your window and don't see what you used to see, it's less comfortable, right? Yes, Ann Turner, in the back.
You talked about a lot of factors that would affect that curve. Yet one other one that would be interesting to correlate with it would be divorce rate, impact families, and things like that.
We have seen, and the sociologists will tell you that when they study the sociology of religion, they're also studying the sociology of the family, the economy. I mean, there's all kinds of things that factor into this. And I think you're going to hear Phyllis Tickle talk about that in a little bit. Let's move on. But very true. The decline of the family is a big part of it. So one of the big important points I want to make today is this is not new. It may feel new to us because you're hearing these statistics and you're hearing me say, I've been part of closing 10 Presbyterian churches just in the last couple of years. It may feel new, But it did not start with the generation that is just younger than you. And we all think that. My parents thought that, my grandparents thought that. I mean, it's a long-term kind of thing. It did not start with our wayward kids, and it's not right for us to put it all upon them. However, there are some factors there. Excuse me. Our great-grandparents, and I don't know who you are, where your age is or anything, but I want you to think about just in general, our society's great-grandparents founded churches. They built churches, a lot of them literally hammer and nail helped build churches, but they certainly gave their money to build buildings, original buildings. They shaped their communities, they started programs, they started organizations, they welcomed in other organizations, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Boys Club, Girls Club, Alcoholics Anonymous. It started way back. This is not new. Most of our grandparents were regular churchgoers. It was kind of the fabric of their society. They were committed. That's where their people were. That's where their friends and neighbors were. That's where they went to hear everything going on in town. They gave their time. They gave their money. They really gave all their being to the church, and often to the denominations as well. Our grandparents were very active in keeping our denominations alive. Robust Presbyterian women's organizations, I could just go on and on and on about the things that were denominational wide and the effort that they would put to the connectional church that we have throughout our communities. Their children, whoever that might be, their children and their children's children would claim church affiliation. They would claim it. They would say they believe in God, but no matter what, they did not go to church as regularly. Do you know now that even in Canyon Creek, the statistics tell us that people attend about half the Sundays of the year? And look at yourself. You travel, it rains some mornings, you've got reasons, and there may be a few statistics that skew one way, and most of you that come to a summer Sunday school probably are skewing it that direction. But across our membership, people come, the regular attenders, regular active attenders still come only half the Sundays out of the year. That has changed, right? That has changed. I know that because we sit around and talk about it in finance committee. I said I wasn't going to talk about that. When asked, they claimed that faith and those elements of religiosity that I talked about, they claim those as part of their life. Yet as they age, they participate less and less. Can you think of people in this church that you know were so active when their kids were here and when their kids were in the youth program and you haven't seen them since, or you rarely see them? As we and the generation that may be talked about in this room here, as we age, we participate less and less. And it starts when we have children and declines from there. The generation after them that I'm talking about, the one who claimed church affiliation, honestly had little experience with church going at all. Maybe as children, but since their childhood, they haven't done much about it. I've got a few of those. They simply don't even think about it. I have asked my own children in a very careful, non-offending way, let's just chat a little bit. I'm doing some research for a class I'm teaching, so this really isn't about you, but let's have a little bit of a conversation about why you don't go to church. I said, I just need it for my research. And I got some really interesting answers. We'll talk about. But yes, things have changed, and it's not just the voice of the younger generation, even though that is a big influence. But it is all generations right now that have changed in their outlook. Things have absolutely changed. Let's talk about some of those. They've been mentioned already. So first of all, there's been a lot of headline trauma. And headline trauma is affecting people in their opinion of churches. Certainly the LGBTQ plus acceptance and normalization of all society, but certainly our younger generations, it's very normalized. They don't give it a second thought. And they just don't see why we don't get it. And it is not in just the mainline denominations. This is true in the evangelical churches, the Pentecostal churches, everywhere. They just don't see why we don't get it. It's so normal to them. Certainly the clergy, sexual abuse and other forms of misconduct, not just sexual abuse, but other forms of misconduct has driven a lot of people to say, I don't want to be a part of that anymore. We know that. We know that's true. It has been especially harsh on the Roman Catholic Church. But don't believe they're the only ones immune to that. Just don't believe it. Monetary malfeasance, or at least the appearance of it. We say here at Canyon Creek, we are open and honest and ask us anything, anytime, and we really do mean it because we care about not even the appearance of monetary malfeasance, but there has been, and there will be, and there will continue to be, not just of churches, but of many nonprofits. And they all get kind of bulked in together. If you hear about a church, 50 miles across the state that had monetary malfeasance, people are going to assume that they're all like that, right? Because it's headline trauma. That's what I call it. There's a real distaste across our society right now about political extremes, and they are perceiving many churches, both on the far right and on the far left social justice movements. They are perceiving that those are political extremes, whether we agree with that or not. They are perceiving as political extremes and don't want to be a part of it. Certainly gun violence and mass shootings and all of the effects of that. And I'm tired of hearing about thoughts and prayers. And one of our churches up north of here near Allen, after the Allen shootings, wasn't sure what to say. They wanted to put up a big banner sign out front that said something like, our thoughts and prayers are with the city of Allen and all the surrounding communities, but they decided that wasn't real, wasn't going to bring in a lot of new folks by putting that out in front of the church. So they had several, of course, committee meetings about it, session meetings, and decided to put up a banner that said, pray for what's next. And that has really garnered some positive comments to them about, we aren't even sure what we're praying for right now, but we're praying for what's next. And I think that's a good theme even for this discussion we're having today, that let's pray for what's next. Certainly racial tensions and the realities of that is lots and lots of headline trauma, right? Did I say that? Yes, Hal?
And a lot of that correlates to the social change,
Absolutely.
because in recent years, the attention span has dropped dramatically. And now it's down to 12 seconds.
12-second attention span.
So that's about all you have time to do, read the headline.
And
Most people never
yeah.
go deeper.
You guys have been here for 40 minutes. I'm really proud of you. You get a little star at the end. Okay, why is it not moving? Okay, you can click for me. Cultural and generational norms certainly have changed. I have to say, when I asked one of my own 30-something-year-old kids, why aren't you here? Just shrugged their shoulders. That was their answer. I don't know. Doesn't matter, right? It's a kind of an apathy and I don't know, what's there for me. I walk in and there's nobody there that looks like me. Is there anybody in this room that looks like you? Right. Absolutely, the impression that churches are judgmental, whether we say we are, claim we're not, I don't care how many times we say that. Culturally, the word church brings up those kind of feelings of judgmental. Another kind of snarky answer I got was, well, I was made to go as a child and now I don't have to, ha ha ha. I thought, well, okay. and it was said a little bit in jest. But still, there is a sense in our cultural shift now that we don't have obligations like we used to have. I didn't have a choice but to go to church as a child. And I did it, and I did it as a teenager, and I did it as a young adult, and I'm still here now because somewhere in the back of my head that got beat into me, and I still am of this cultural generation that while I believe deep in my heart this is the place to be, there is a sense of I need to be there. And I think that hasn't been passed on. I don't like churchy people. There have been some bad impressions from churchy people, whatever that is. I had a bad experience once. I heard that. I had a bad experience once. Is there anybody in this room who has never had a bad experience at a church? But there is a generational and a cultural shift that if you go to a restaurant once and you don't like the food, you're probably not going back. Rather than, well, I'll go try and order something different off the menu, right? I mean, it's just a way we think now. And besides, I saw it only had a 3-star rating on Yelp, right? A really deep thing is I had a friend who was deeply hurt by the church. My daughters had a friend from kindergarten that they knew all through high school. And she came out as gay in high school, and her church, the youth group, the Sunday school teachers, everybody absolutely pushed her out and told her she wasn't welcome there, that she stopped what she was doing. And my daughters remember that experience and remember how brokenhearted she was and the effect, the long-term effect, as they've even stayed in contact with her. I had a friend who was hurt by the church, and people are fiercely loyal to their friends of this generation. And when you have a friend who was hurt by something, just like if you're in a restaurant with a friend and that friend got food poisoning, you might not go back there because, you know, your friend didn't. I give to and volunteer for other organizations. Church is just on the same level as the SPCA and all of the other charitable organizations that we give to. Too much of it is asked of me. I don't like committees. People literally do not like committees. They don't like to come to committee meetings. They don't like to be asked to teach Sunday school. They don't like to be asked to volunteer at the booth in the atrium. They just don't like to be asked. Sorry, I'm plenty busy. And I think another big cultural shift is people are not joiners. Country clubs are struggling with membership. Rotary clubs and those kind of civic clubs are struggling with membership. And this is across the board. This is not only the younger generation, but it's all of us in this room are not joiners as much as we used to do. And churches are perceived as something you join, and they just are uncomfortable with that concept. My son went to a church after he got married where they asked him to sign a contract of church membership. Well, first of all, he's an attorney, and that did not settle well with him. But the whole idea, he said, Mom, can you believe this? They wanted me to sign a membership contract. I'm not doing that. I mean, it was just totally offensive to him. We won't debate what all the content of the contract was. I probably wouldn't have signed it either. But just the whole idea that they were asked to sign a membership contract for this church was just more than he could swallow. I think one of the other things we're looking at right now is logistics and lifestyle changes. It's just not moving for me. You got it. One more time. It takes 3 clicks to work. Okay. Is lifestyles and logistics. I have to work on Sunday. I told one of my adult children, I said, did you know that when I was a kid, nobody had to work on Sunday, except maybe a few rare professions, but now everybody has to work on Sunday. Everything's open. Everything is, I mean, you get called into your office on Sundays, all kinds of things happen. The I have to work on Sundays thing has had a huge impact on this society. Schedule overload, we all know we're in that. There's better things to do. It's our only day as a family. Sports events, we've all heard about that being scheduled on Sunday. And you know, they tell us one of the biggest competitors to 11 o'clock church is the concept of brunch. Once restaurants started offering brunch, that is a Sunday thing, and you laugh, but I love brunch too. And if any of you want to go to brunch today, just ask. But this idea of you got to get there when the restaurant opens up, because that's when they start serving the good mimosas and such. Across all our generations, it is easier to stay home, and I am grateful, grateful, grateful for the fact that we have people joining us on Zoom today. Many of us have need for that in our lives. Remote church, even worship services being live streamed is a huge blessing, huge blessing. But for the most part, it is a blessing to those of us who've been here all along. The draw of new people through that is not nearly what we would want to believe it is. It is wonderful to keep those of us connected. They're here. I think some of that will change over time, but it's just not there right now. Lifestyle changes. Gosh, we've changed the music in the church. We've changed the architecture in the church. We've changed the colors in the church. We have concrete floors downstairs instead of carpet in some areas. Oh my gosh. We had a question over here. Okay.
My grandchildren, they come to see us. Parents are not with us,
Right.
and they are preteen
Uh-huh.
and one. And they love coming
I know.
to church.
Yes.
So there's hope.
There is hope. And my 5-year-old granddaughter is downstairs right now. And her parents are probably at brunch. Okay. I am just saying, I'm being gut honest. I hope they're not going to watch this recorded video. Oh gosh, I messed it up again. Will you go to the one that says number 4? I'm just going to stop punching. Faith and theology. You will find many people who say, I quit. There was a big breakup, a big divorce with church. I quit because I disagreed with something that I heard that was said, the church's stance on something, the big official church's stance on something here or there. I quit. So I call that the great divorce with church. And you will find a lot of people of all generations who have had an I quit moment, and they just walk out. These are issues of faith and issues of theology, and not being able to get past that in their own faith. This thing, I could teach an entire lesson on this concept of deconstruction. It's a term that you hear now where people, as they are growing older in age, are starting to look at the things that they were taught as a child and question them and thinking, was that really correct what I was taught? And whose idea was that? And are we sure that's the way the Bible was meant to be? As we become a little more open-minded about the things that the Bible has said and the context and such, there is a big, huge movement, especially in the evangelical church, of people doing what they're called deconstructing their faith. And they're really hurt by this, and they leave the church and kind of go into a cave and study and think and wonder about the faith foundations upon which they have been raised. And I guarantee it's happened within our mainline churches as well. But that's a really interesting one. This book by Brian McLaren called Faith After Doubt is about finding faith again after you've gone through a huge time of doubting. And this is a little bit about deconstruction and reconstructing our faith. It's a really interesting book. I've been wanting to do a group study on that one, because I think even those of us who are loyal and faithful do still have our questions. There is certainly the spiritual but not religious movement that's going on. Sociologists tell us that this even started back probably in the 1930s, significantly in American society, with the creation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am not saying anything negative about AA. I am a big believer, and I believe that it changes people's lives dramatically. But the concept in AA is with your higher power. And they gave people permission for one of the first times in our current white Christian America. They gave people permission to define their own God or their own power and what that was. And the other thing they did is they kind of took away the power of clergy, because your peers were your sponsors or are your sponsors, and people who've been through it before are authority. And you'll hear Phyllis Tickle talk about a change in authority. And before that, it was all about the authority of clergy and of teachers and professors and doctors and those kinds of things. And suddenly AA created this sense of peer authority, which I think is a good thing to a large extent, but it has had an effect. Sociologists will tell you that that mindset has had an effect on us. Okay, so where's all this going? Is Christianity dying? Is it all doom and gloom? Okay, next chart. We haven't spent a lot of time on Bible study today, but if you remember the story when Jesus was talking to Peter and the disciples, and he was talking about, who do they say I am? And then he says, who do you say I am? No, who do you say I am? And Peter said, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him and said, blessed are you. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Now, lots of sermons have been preached on this, whether or not this was the Roman Catholic view of Peter and apostolic succession. He was the first pope. Or whether the rock that he was talking about is the theology of Peter's answer. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And on that rock, I will build my church. But either way, we're not going to discuss the interpretations of that, but it says the gates of Hades will never prevail against it. And I believe that the Holy Spirit is alive and well. Jesus declared that the church is eternal, and I believe that with all my heart, and I think we all do. God is not finished with us yet. And I think we're going to see that as we look next week into some of the new things that are happening. We have about a 2-minute video about 2 or 3 minute video that we're going to listen to next. This is by Phyllis Tickle. She has been one of my favorite authors for many years. Unfortunately, she died in 2015. And I think in probably 2013 or 14 across the hall, we did an entire year maybe studying her books about the Great Emergence and Emergence Christianity. She's the author of many, many books. She, interestingly, is not a theology professor or anything. She was the founding editor of the religious department of Publishers Weekly and curated many, many articles about religion, and so became just a very respected authority about religion, religious trends, and what she calls the sociology of religion. She was a speaker that often spoke. You can find many, many of her YouTube videos or people who have made YouTube videos and put out there of her. We have a DVD series, I believe, in our church library. I liked it so much, I bought my own. We've done it in small groups. Really an interesting idea. And I'm going to tell you, we'll summarize what she says at the end. She talks fast. She's from Johnson City, Tennessee. She has a great Tennessee accent, but she talks fast and she uses a lot of big words. So just bear with her and let's listen to what she has to say. This is kind of a summary of her book here called The Great Emergence.
The Great Emergence is the name we're giving to the current upheaval that is certainly across all of Western culture and to some extent globally. It tries to name something that happens every 500 years. The Episcopal tradition has a bishop, Mark Dyer, who says when he gets right here that to understand the Great Emergence, what you really have to understand first is that about every 500 years the church feels compelled to have a giant rummage sale, and we're having one. And he's absolutely right. 500 years ago was, of course, the Great Reformation of 1517. 500 years before that was the Great Schism of 1051. 500 years before that was the Council of Chalcedon, the fall of Rome, the age of Gregory the Great, just to keep the greats going. 500 years before that was what's now being called increasingly the Great Transformation, the change of the eras. If we were a Jewish audience, some rabbi would rise up and say, it's not a Christian phenomenon, it's a Judeo-Christian, because 500 years from the Great Transformation, what we have, of course, is the Babylonian captivity and the end of First Temple Judaism, the birth of Second. 500 years before that, we have the Davidic dynasty out of which Meshua is to come. Okay. So the Great Emergence, it's an every 500-year phenomenon. We're just lucky. We get to live through one. I don't think anybody knows exactly where the Great Emergence is going, much less where the Christianity, the emerging or emergent, or what Christianity is coming out of it, is going to go exactly. But there's some contours that are clearly visible right now and can be described. For one thing, this thing is radically Jesus-oriented. It takes the position he meant what he said, which is fairly radical. It is definitely communal, even to the point that about a quarter of it is probably engaging in a form of monasticism, as a matter of fact. It's post-denominational, it's post-Protestant. It is largely based in virtual reality as opposed to bricks and mortar, and organizes itself on the net. It is deeply concerned with theologies of religion that get rid of Christian particularity or exclusivitism. It is dipping back ardently, if you will, to 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century to try to find there the passionate parts of the Christian liturgy that sustained the church during those dreadful years of persecution, and then to incorporate those into itself. So wherever it's going, there's every reason right now to rejoice that God is doing a new thing amongst us, and it's called emerging or emergent Christianity.
So did you get all that? She talks fast and she uses lots of big words, but I've listened to it so many times, I think I get most of it. What she is saying, let's go to the next chart just real quickly, is that whether we call it God's timing or coincidence, or that's just the way the ball bounces, history has very clearly, and especially the history of religion, but it is also true about the history of cultures and the huge impacts on that. Philosophers have talked about this for many years, that every 500 years we have a great upheaval. And she says in the church, we have a rummage sale. We get rid of all the things that don't work, just like Martin Luther did 500 years ago. He said, I'm getting rid of the stuff that doesn't work, the indulgences and the royalty of the priesthood and those kinds of things. He was getting rid of the things that didn't work. And you can go back through church history, a fascinating thing, these 500-year elements, and see that. So even just looking at the time of Christianity, the 1st century, Jesus Christ was born. This was the birth of Christianity. 500 years later was the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Dark Ages and the beginning of the monastic traditions. And the monastic traditions, even though in Protestantism we may not think about them much, they had a tremendous impact on how Christianity was spread, how it was perceived at the local level. The monastics went out in different areas and established their forms of being. It had a lot to do with the movement of the church that started along that time. But by the 11th century, this is when they had the big schism, they call it, that the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Roman Church, they both excommunicated each other. I always kind of like that. They excommunicated each other and said, we're going to split. We today are, as Western Christians, really don't think about the Eastern Orthodox Church too much until you take that trip to the Holy Land and you see all the people with tall hats and you say, well, who are those people over there? And we all have to explain, oh, those are part, in many cases, not always, but various different hats are people of the Eastern Orthodox tradition. 11th century then was that. The Middle Ages became the Crusades. We know this is when they all started fighting, and what essentially became, the world kind of got split in half, north to south, and north became Christian and south became Islam. Not entirely, but that was what a lot of that was about at the time, and the fall of the Byzantine Empire. Then along came the 16th century. We know the most about that as Protestants. This was the birth of Protestantism, rejection of indulgences in the priesthood, accessibility of the Bible to all. That had, the printing press came along, the Age of Enlightenment, rationalism, industrialism, Coach Malcolm, and we can have a whole lesson on all those things, but a lot of changes started in the 16th century culturally, right? Every one of these were cultural changes, geographic changes, sociological changes, and had impacts on religion. She claims that now in the 21st century, 500 more years later, we're beginning to see it again. And this great emergence, maybe so, emergence. The one that hit me, she said, it's post-denominational, meaning the end of denominations. And she said, also, did you hear her say that there's this idea of getting rid of Christianity per se and bringing in all these different traditions of religion and spirituality into something that is very, very spiritual. But you'll see, she believes that will be focused on Jesus more than we have and many times before, and who Jesus is, what Jesus did. Brian McLaren, this author here, writes another book called The Great Orthodoxy, and this is where he talks about Christians pulling the good parts from Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, all the isms of the world, and bringing them into our practices and creating an orthodoxy and an orthopraxis, a belief system and a practice system that has elements of many of the world's great religions. She believes that's what's happening in the 21st century, that we're seeing a big, big social change that's happening, and we're on the edge of it right now. Next chart, we're almost done here. In her book, and she didn't talk about this there, but in the book, she talks about these the contours of emerging Christianity. She mentioned some of them there. Radically Jesus oriented. In other words, Jesus meant what he said. You've heard of the red letter Christians that are out there right now, the ones who follow the red words of Jesus in the Bibles that have them printed in red. Radically Jesus oriented. Radically communal. I know we all, when we count our blessings and give our gratitude, the gratitude for community comes so frequently. And I think that is true all across Western Christianity, that whether that church over there, we agree with what they say or what they do, they have a form of community that's important to them. Radical community. She mentioned there may be even a regrowth of monastic kinds of communities. The Iona community comes to mind, various ones like that. Post-denominational and post-Protestant. We may not even be using the word Protestant going forward. We may not be using the word Roman Catholic going forward. I have a very, very dear friend that we became friends back in our 20s, and he told me I was the first Protestant he had ever known. He grew up in a very, very strong Catholic environment in New Orleans. And he went to a Catholic high school and he went to a Catholic college. And then he said, I think you're the first Protestant I've ever actually known. And I'm thinking, really? Well, you lived but I thought, well, I guess I didn't know that many Catholics now that I think of it. You know, it's all where you grew up. And now at our age now, we're both talking about how much we love Richard Rohr and Father Boyle, yes, thank you. You know, we're all merging toward the same kind of stuff that we love, and his small group studying Richard Rohr and mine studying Richard Rohr. And I guess you're not so bad after all. Virtual versus brick and mortar, non-exclusive, all are welcome, period, end of conversation. It's not even a discussion anymore. I believe that's what we're going to see in the next generation. It's not even going to be a discussion. We're talking about it now. Not even going to be a discussion. And return to the passionate parts of the early church. So prayer, deep group prayer, singing, liturgy, communion, meditation as a group. I think we'll see more of those practices of the early church. So Phyllis Tickle is certainly fascinating in talking about what she believes the contours are going to be. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited about this. I look at it and I think, what about my job at the presbytery? If we're post-denominational, I won't care. It's fine. But I think that it's hard for us to swallow a little bit of this, right? To be Protestant, no more Protestantism and no more Roman Catholic, and we're all just Christians, and no more church buildings. We won't even have facility problems, folks. I'm pretty excited about this, and I hope you are too. We'll see you next week, and we'll talk a little bit more about the hope that we have. Click to the next chart. I believe it's the last one. A new thing will emerge. The Holy Spirit is alive and well. Amen. Thank you.